Can a region once dismissed as barren desert become the next Singapore? From the dusty roads of Ouagadougou to the wide plains of Niger and Mali, something extraordinary is unfolding. The world has often spoken of the Sahel with pity, describing it as a place of endless droughts, conflicts, and despair. But behind the headlines and statistics, a quiet transformation is beginning to roar. In the same way that Singapore once rose from swamplands to skyscrapers, the Sahel is daring to imagine a different destiny. Everywhere, signs of awakening appear. In small villages, young engineers sketch solar grids on chalkboards. In crowded classrooms, teachers tell their students not about leaving for Europe, but about staying to build at home. Across dusty construction sites, the hum of new machines fills the air. A generation once defined by struggle is now defined by ambition. At the center of this story stands a vision carried by leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traore, who believes that the Sahel's wealth lies not only in its gold and minerals, but in its people's courage to dream. For decades, the region's narrative was written by outsiders who measured progress through foreign aid and dependency. Today, that story is being rewritten by Africans themselves. The Sahel is no longer content to survive. It wants to thrive. It no longer looks to copy the West. It wants to create a model rooted in its own soil, shaped by its own spirit. The question is no longer if the Sahel can rise, but how far it can go when its people unite behind a single idea: that Africa's future will not be imported. It will be built right here, from the ground up. This is not the story of poverty. It is the story of possibility. To understand the Sahel's bold dream of becoming the next Singapore, we must first look at where this vision was born. For centuries, the Sahel has been described as a frontier of hardship. Stretching from Senegal to Sudan, this vast belt of dry land is where the desert meets life, and where life has always refused to give up. The world looked at it and saw only sand, conflict, and poverty. Yet those who live there have always seen something else: resilience. In the late 20th century, the Sahel became a testing ground for foreign aid and intervention. Billions of dollars flowed in through international programs, promising prosperity, but little changed. Roads were built only to fall into disrepair. Mines were opened, yet profits flowed overseas. For decades, decisions about Africa's future were made in Paris, Washington, or Beijing, not in Ouagadougou, Bamako, or Niamey. Generations of young Africans grew up believing that progress could only come from outside. That illusion has now shattered. The rise of new African leaders such as Ibrahim Traore, Assimi Goïta, and Abdourahmane Tiani has reawakened a deeper, older truth. No one will build Africa except Africans themselves. Their message has resonated across the Sahel like a drumbeat of unity, sovereignty, and dignity. What once were slogans have become state policies. Instead of accepting aid tied to conditions, the Sahel is beginning to pool its own resources, its own gold, and its own labor. The Sahel's challenge is not only economic, but also psychological. It is about changing the story Africans tell about themselves. Singapore's success began not with skyscrapers, but with a mindset: the belief that a small, poor nation could chart its own destiny through discipline, education, and unity. The Sahel is embracing that same idea, but with its own character. It draws not from the sea, but from the desert, not from foreign investors, but from ancestral strength. The movement toward self-determination gained real momentum after the creation of the Sahel Alliance in 2024. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger signed a pact that went beyond military cooperation. They envisioned a new economic corridor connecting their capitals with railways, pipelines, and fiber optic lines. They announced that gold reserves would be used to back their own currency, instead of sitting idle in foreign banks. They opened schools dedicated to renewable energy and agritech, training a generation that would stay, not flee. It is within this context that comparisons with Singapore become more than just symbolism. In the 1960s, Singapore was surrounded by instability, short on land, and dismissed as a failed experiment. It responded by investing heavily in education, building efficient governance, and becoming a global hub of trade. The Sahel, facing its own isolation, is following a similar path, building human capital, connecting infrastructure, and asserting control over its resources. Still, the world doubts. Many experts argue that the Sahel is too divided, too poor, and too insecure to transform itself. Yet these same arguments were once used against every successful nation in history. The difference today is that the Sahel is not asking for permission. Its leaders no longer frame their plans as aid requests, but as blueprints for sovereignty. The language has shifted from development projects to national missions. Across the region, one can feel the atmosphere changing. Street murals in Ouagadougou depict farmers beside solar panels. Local news channels broadcast debates about industrialization, not dependency. Women's cooperatives are turning traditional crafts into export businesses. In small workshops, inventors experiment with recycled materials to create affordable machines for agriculture and construction. The dream is no longer abstract. It is visible in the hands of ordinary people. The world's media often focuses on the Sahel's conflicts, but beneath that turbulence lies an economic awakening that mirrors Singapore's quiet beginnings. Where the city-state once used its port to connect the east and west, the Sahel is using its land to connect north and south, linking the Mediterranean to the Gulf of Guinea. This continental bridge could become Africa's backbone for trade, energy, and technology. The Sahel's story is not one of imitation, but of reinvention. It is the story of a region reclaiming its narrative after centuries of exploitation. The question of the next Singapore is not about copying a model. It is about proving that transformation is possible anywhere, even in the most unexpected places. The sand that once symbolized emptiness is now becoming the foundation for something new, a self-made future. To understand the Sahel's transformation, we must face the reality of the problems it is trying to overcome. For generations, this region has stood between hope and hardship. It is rich in gold, uranium, and human potential, yet has lived in poverty and dependency. The world often looked at the Sahel and saw a place defined by weakness, while the truth was that its strength had been stolen, not lost. For decades, development across the Sahel followed a formula created elsewhere. International lenders, foreign governments, and global corporations promised growth and modernization. They spoke of partnership and progress, but in reality, their deals tied the region to debt. The Sahel became dependent on imported goods, foreign technologies, and outside consultants. Local farmers could not compete with subsidized food from abroad. Young professionals who studied science or engineering found few opportunities at home because their countries relied on foreign experts. Progress became something imported, not created. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank became the architects of economic policy. Every reform came with conditions that limited national sovereignty. Nations borrowed money in dollars, cut public spending, and opened their markets to foreign investors. Even when prices for gold and oil reached record highs, the wealth left the continent before it could build roads, schools, or hospitals. The Sahel was left with debts, exhausted minds, and broken promises. This cycle of dependency shaped an entire generation. Many young Africans began to believe that success could only be found abroad. Migration became the dream, not development. Villages lost their teachers, clinics lost their doctors, and local innovation faded. The brain drain hollowed out the very talent that could have rebuilt the region. The loss was not only economic, but also emotional. People began to feel that their homeland could not offer them dignity or purpose. While the people struggled, insecurity spread. Armed groups filled the vacuum left by weak governance. Foreign troops arrived, claiming to bring peace, but often deepened mistrust. The world's headlines called the Sahel unstable, violent, and hopeless. Few spoke about the historical forces that created this instability, or the external powers that profited from it. To outsiders, the region became a symbol of failure. To those who lived there, it became a reminder that they had been denied control of their own destiny. Infrastructure decay turned the problem into a daily burden. Roads remained unfinished, electricity unreliable, and internet access limited. Trade between neighboring countries was minimal, even though they shared culture and borders. Farmers could not bring their crops to market, and factories could not move goods beyond national lines. Each broken bridge or pothole represented more than neglect. It symbolized dependence. Corruption and mismanagement added to the weight. Some leaders chose the comfort of foreign approval over the demands of their own citizens. Contracts were signed in secret. Profits disappeared into private accounts, and national resources were traded for short-term political gain. The public grew frustrated and cynical. Ordinary people worked harder, but saw little change. Environmental challenges made everything worse. The Sahel's climate is fragile, and droughts often erase years of progress. Soil degradation forced families to abandon farms. Water scarcity fueled migration and conflict. Foreign organizations offered technical assistance, yet the deeper issue remained the same. Local people had little power over how their land was used or managed. As the soil dried, so did trust in the idea that outsiders would fix it. Eventually, a new awareness began to grow. People started to realize that the system was never designed for their benefit. It rewarded dependency and punished self-reliance. Every loan created more control from abroad, and every aid project weakened national confidence. When Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger began rejecting this model, the global establishment called them reckless. But within the Sahel, this resistance was not viewed as rebellion. It was viewed as awakening. The problem of the Sahel is not the absence of wealth or talent. It is the absence of ownership. For decades, statistics looked positive on paper, while lives remained stagnant in reality. A small elite benefited, while the majority stayed poor. The essential question became clear: how can a land so rich still have people who go hungry? This is the challenge the new Sahel generation has chosen to confront. They understand that poverty is not fate. It is structure. Dependency is not weakness. It is a system that can be dismantled. Their goal is not simply to survive, but to regain control. To do this, they must replace borrowed visions with their own. They must build a new foundation, rooted in cooperation, education, and courage. The task ahead is immense, but it is no longer impossible. The Sahel has learned that independence is not given. It is earned through unity and sacrifice. The time has come to turn pain into purpose and transform struggle into strength. The path will be difficult, yet for the first time, it is a path chosen by the Sahel itself. The turning point for the Sahel did not arrive through foreign speeches or international summits. It began with a simple but revolutionary decision: to stop asking for permission to build and to start using what already existed within their reach. The Sahel Alliance, a partnership formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, turned that decision into a concrete plan of action that is now reshaping the identity of an entire region. The first act of transformation focused on reclaiming control over natural resources. For many years, gold, uranium, and oil were extracted by foreign companies, while the communities living near the mines remained poor. Under a new generation of leadership, the Sahel nations began to review every contract signed in the past. Operations once controlled by outsiders were reopened under state authority or shared ownership with local cooperatives. Revenues that had previously disappeared into foreign accounts were redirected into national budgets and community projects. The policy known as Build with Gold became both a slogan and a reality, channeling domestic wealth into roads, hospitals, and power grids without the burden of foreign debt. Visible change followed quickly. Across Burkina Faso and Niger, local construction teams started to pave new roads, connecting isolated towns to national markets. Engineers and youth brigades worked together on bridges and railway lines that had been abandoned for decades. For the first time, development was being built by local hands using local resources. The sense of pride and ownership grew with every kilometer of new road. Energy independence became the next major goal. For generations, the region had suffered from blackouts and unreliable power. The Sahel Alliance launched an ambitious renewable energy program centered on solar power, the one resource that the desert never lacked. Vast solar fields appeared around cities such as Ouagadougou, Gao, and Niamey. Hydroelectric projects were expanded, and partnerships with technical allies provided knowledge in nuclear and geothermal energy. The objective was not just to produce electricity, but to control the means of production. The leaders envisioned a day when the Sahel could light its homes and power its industries without relying on foreign grids or imported fuel. Education and innovation became the third pillar of this transformation. The alliance created the Sahel Polytechnic Network, a system of universities and vocational institutes focused on technology, agriculture, and engineering. Scholarships encouraged students to study and return to contribute to national projects. Research centers began developing local solutions for soil restoration, water conservation, and energy storage. The message to the youth was clear: the future will be built by those who stay. Agriculture received equal attention. Food dependency was identified as one of the deepest sources of vulnerability. New programs provided farmers with modern irrigation systems, affordable equipment, and access to credit. In the arid regions, innovative techniques turned sand into fertile soil. Communities learned to manage water collectively and plant crops suited to local climates. What had long been dry, empty land began to bloom again with grain, fruit, and hope. To strengthen regional cooperation, the member countries created a common infrastructure fund. Each contributed a share of their natural resource income to finance shared projects such as transnational highways, communication networks, and trade corridors linking the Sahel to coastal ports. By building together, they reduced costs, increased trust, and began to imagine the region not as separate nations, but as a unified economic space. Diplomacy also changed its tone. The Sahel countries began negotiating as a single bloc, presenting a unified voice in global forums. Their agreements with foreign powers were rewritten to include fairer terms, technology transfer, and job creation. They no longer accepted deals that extracted wealth without building capacity. The world started to see that the Sahel was not a charity case, but a rising force demanding equality and respect. Alongside these structural reforms came a cultural awakening. Musicians, painters, and filmmakers began celebrating the new spirit of independence. Schools taught national pride and Pan-African cooperation. Media outlets that once echoed foreign narratives began to highlight local success stories. People no longer viewed development as something that belonged to others. It became part of their collective identity. The road ahead remains difficult. Building without foreign funding requires patience and sacrifice. Yet for the first time in decades, the Sahel is moving forward on its own terms. The foundation of this progress is not aid or luck, but discipline, collaboration, and a deep belief in self-reliance. Each new road, each solar field, and each young graduate represents a step toward freedom. The Sahel, once defined by dependency, is now writing a new story of dignity and determination. What was once a region of survival is turning into a region of builders, and every act of construction carries the same message. The future belongs to those who create it with their own hands. Can the Sahel truly follow in Singapore's footsteps, or is the comparison only symbolic? To answer this, we must look beyond geography and history to the deeper patterns that drive transformation. Singapore's rise began with three key forces: strong leadership, social discipline, and a long-term vision rooted in education and industrialization. The Sahel, despite its differences, is beginning to follow a similar logic adapted to its own environment. Singapore had no oil, gold, or fertile land. Its greatest asset was human organization. It transformed scarcity into opportunity by investing in people. The Sahel, in contrast, possesses immense natural wealth, but has long lacked coordination and control. Today, that balance is shifting. Through regional cooperation and resource management, the Sahel is learning that unity can multiply value just as effectively as Singapore's discipline once did. Another striking similarity lies in leadership. When Lee Kuan Yew guided Singapore through uncertainty, his goal was not to please the world, but to secure independence. Leaders such as Ibrahim Traore and Assimi Goïta are following a comparable path, emphasizing sovereignty over approval. Their rhetoric of self-determination has become policy, and their defiance of external pressure mirrors the same spirit that once defined Singapore's early years. However, the Sahel's advantage lies in something Singapore never had: scale and diversity. With vast land, minerals, sunlight, and a young population, the region has the raw materials for continental influence. If it succeeds in stabilizing governance, ensuring accountability, and maintaining its focus on education and energy, the Sahel could evolve not into a copy of Singapore, but into a new model of African modernization. The challenge will be consistency. Singapore's success took decades of discipline and collective purpose. For the Sahel, progress will depend on the ability to resist short-term temptation and political division. The true test is not in building infrastructure, but in building trust between nations and citizens. If that trust holds, the Sahel may not become the next Singapore. It will become something greater, a symbol of Africa's power to transform adversity into achievement, and to prove that development does not need to be imported from abroad. It can grow from the desert itself. The story of the Sahel is no longer one of despair, but of determination. What began as a struggle for survival has turned into a declaration of independence, a promise that Africa can rise on its own terms. The leaders and people of the Sahel are proving that sovereignty is not a slogan. It is a daily effort built through work, unity, and faith in their own capacity. The dream ahead is clear. The Sahel does not wish to imitate Singapore or any other nation. It aims to build a model rooted in African realities, powered by African minds, and sustained by African resources. The desert that once symbolized emptiness is now being transformed into a symbol of abundance. Fields of solar panels shine where there was once dust. Roads stretch across borders that once divided nations. Schools and research centers are teaching a new generation that progress is possible without permission. This transformation is not only political or economic, it is deeply spiritual. It is about reclaiming the belief that Africa's destiny belongs to Africans. It is about showing the world that dignity, creativity, and intelligence can thrive even in the harshest conditions. When the Sahel stands tall, it carries the hopes of millions across the continent who have long been told to wait for help that never comes. The call to action is simple, yet profound. Build where you are, believe in what you have, and protect what you create. Each act of construction, education, or cooperation adds another brick to the foundation of a new Africa. As one Sahel leader said, "We will not be the next Singapore. We will be the first Sahel." That vision captures the heart of this movement, not imitation, but inspiration. The world is watching as a region once defined by crisis becomes the birthplace of renewal. The Sahel's rise is no longer a dream. It is a reality taking shape under the African sun.